All right, today we are going to be covering chapter 18, which is on nutrition and metabolism. All right, so here's some roots, prefixes, and suffixes that you'll need to know throughout the chapter. Some of them you might already be familiar with. Calorie kind of means, it actually means heat. Lip, we know, is lipids, as in fat. Mal, like malware or malnutrition. Mal means fat, bad. Meter is something that we measure. In this case, we'll talk about a calorimeter. Nutri, N-U-T-R-I, means to nourish, like nutrient. Obese, obesity is fat. All right, so let's dig in. Excuse me. So nutrition is basically the study of nutrients and how the body processes those nutrients and then uses the nutrients. Nutrients are the chemicals from the environment and that the organisms need for survival. In this case, for humans, we need carbs, and remember the abbreviation of carbs is CHO. So carbohydrates, proteins, lipids. We also need vitamins, minerals, and of course, water. Water is the one of the requirements of life. And we use these to supply energy to fuel all of our metabolic processes. Remember, we break down carbs into glucose, and the cells use those that glucose for cellular respiration. And the waste products are carbon dioxide, water, and energy. We use amino acids. We can break down proteins into amino acids for the building blocks of producing molecules that the body needs. We can classify nutrients in one of two ways: macronutrients and micronutrients. Macronutrients are what we require in large quantity. So these are going to be your carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. And that's what's going to be required of the body to provide energy. We've talked about breaking down carbs, lipids, and proteins to provide energy. And typically the body's going to break down the first line is going to be carbs into glucose to provide that energy. But we can break down lipids and proteins and use those to provide energy as well. And there's alternate pathways that we can convert the lipids and proteins into energy. Typically, we would break down, proteins into amino acids and use those amino acids to build up into other proteins. And we would use lipids to break down those into glycerol and fatty acids. But we can throw those into a different pathway and produce energy out of both lipids and proteins. Micronutrients are just going to be required in small amounts. Those are going to be your vitamins and minerals. So we don't need a lot of vitamin C. We don't need a lot of vitamin A. But we do need vitamins in order to maintain life. Vitamins and minerals, they don't provide the body with energy, but what they do is they're going to help the body extract that energy from those macronutrients. And we'll see that later on. All right, so essential nutrients. Essential nutrients, remember, essential means that the body cannot synthesize these, or the body cannot make these in sufficient quantities. So we have to obtain those from the diet itself. So remember, there are 20 amino acids, and 8 of them are essential amino acids. So the body can't make 8 of those amino acids. So we have to bring in those 8 amino acids from food that we eat. And depending on what textbook you read or what source you look at, Some textbooks will say there are 22 amino acids and 9 of them are essential. This textbook says that there's 20 amino acids and 8 of them essential. So just know that there might be some discrepancies. I've always learned that the 20 and 8, but some textbooks will say 22 and 9. But just know that there are discrepancies out there because, we find out new information all the time. So calories, you've heard the term, oh, this has 110 calories in it. So calories is how we express that the amount of energy that's in food. We'll talk about how we derive that term calorie, but it's basically a unit of heat that's required to take that energy out of food. And we'll go into that later on this chapter. Carbohydrates, remember, are organic compounds. Carbohydrates have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And if you remember, organic compounds must contain carbon and hydrogen. But carbohydrates are your starches, your sugars. So remember, we take those starches and we break them down essentially into hopefully glucose that the body will use for energy. And carbohydrates, we can classify those as polysaccharides, and those are going to be what's called, if you've heard the term, complex carbohydrates. Polysaccharides are just, a bunch of carbohydrate molecules kind of glued together. Basically a bunch of sugar molecules that are glued together. Those are going to be like your starches, your complex starches from plant foods, like your leafy green vegetables, like glycogen from meats. Remember, when we break down the glucose, or we break down the carbs into glucose, and we have too much glucose, and we store that glucose as glycogen. Glycogen would be the complex carbohydrate. Remember, glycogen is stored in the liver and skeletal muscle cells. But we can also break down carbohydrates into disaccharides. Those are called, di is two, so disaccharides would be a double sugar, like two sugar molecules. So you can have like a glucose and a glucose glued together. And if you remember from, I believe, the last chapter, salivary amylase will begin that chemical digestion of carbohydrates in your mouth, and it will break down the carbohydrates into disaccharides. So disaccharides are basically your milk sugars, like your sucrose, lactose, maltose, cane sugars, beet sugar, molasses. Those are just some examples. And then we can break down those disaccharides into monosaccharides. And we call those simple sugars or single sugars. Mono means one. And those are going to be from your honeys and your fruits. And we have three of those: glucose, fructose, and galactose. And if you remember from last chapter, we saw this slide. So we have that, we have the mechanical digestion, where mechanical digestion, you break down that large chunk of Big Mac into smaller chunks of Big Mac. And then we have that chemical digestion, that is the actual breaking up of molecules into smaller molecules. So in this case, we're going to take this big complex carbohydrate molecule here, and we're going to use that salivary and pancreatic amylase to break up into these disaccharide molecules. And you can see that we have sucrose, lactose, and maltose. And you can see sucrose is just a glucose and a fructose molecule glued together. And lactose is a galactose and a glucose molecule glued together. And maltose is a glucose and a glucose molecule glued together. And then we can, with sucrose, we have an enzyme called sucrase that would split up that sucrose molecule into a glucose and a fructose molecule. Lactase would split up lactose into galactose and glucose, and maltase would split up maltose into glucose and glucose. So we have these three monosaccharides, glucose, fructose, and galactose. And we know that the body likes to work with glucose. The body really doesn't like to work with fructose or galactose. So what the body will do is it will take galactose and fructose, and it will turn galactose and fructose into glucose before it will begin the whole cellular respiration process. Because, like I said, the body likes to work with glucose for energy production. Now, this process for carbohydrate metabolism, it's more complex than this. I just gave you kind of like the gist of it. There's more steps involved. There's more enzymes involved, but for the purposes of anatomy and physiology intro level, this is going to be what you need to know. So essentially, we have this chemical digestion. And I should, because we have the difference between mechanical digestion and chemical digestion. So I should say chemical digestion here. Breaks down the complex carbs into monosaccharides that are small enough to be absorbed. And remember that absorption happens in the small intestine. And I had a professor that's used to say small intestine. So every time I say small intestine, I want to say small intestine in honor of my old professor. All right, and if you've heard of cellulose, cellulose is what we find in a lot of plant-based foods and leafy green vegetables, which are plant-based foods. Cellulose is the part of the plant that we cannot digest. But it provides a lot of fiber for our body, and we know fiber's good. You take some Metamucil and helps with your poop regulation, kind of builds up your poop. Provides some bulk. So cellulose essentially just kind of correlates cellulose with fiber, but cellulose is basically an undigestible plant-based product. All right, so with carbohydrates, remember that we have those three monosaccharides, fructose, glucose, and galactose, and that we convert galactose and fructose into glucose because the body likes to use glucose for its energy. And you're going to have to know the names of those three monosaccharides, fructose, galactose, and glucose. So one of the questions that I have for you is, do you think that carbohydrates make up DNA or RNA, or does it make up both? Do you think carbohydrates are a component of DNA and or RNA? So the answer is yes. We actually covered this in AMP1. If you remember, we had that slide. Let's see, I'll try and draw it a little bit here. So we had we had our little phosphate group that was attached to a And again, I'm not an artist. We had a chart that looked something like that, where we had our phosphate group and our nitrogenous base, and then here we had that either ribose or deoxyribose, which is a sugar. So that should be your clue to say yes, it's a sugar. So remember, sugars are a carbohydrate. So yes. That sugar is a carbohydrate. So remember, deoxyribose DNA and ribose RNA are sugar molecules. So monosaccharides, carbohydrates, are part of, DNA and RNA. All right, let me move this back over here. All right, so another question that I have is, if you eat a lot of candy, how does this translate into gaining weight? If you eat a lot of candy, how does this translate into gaining weight? All right, so remember, candy is just basically sugar. Remember, carbohydrate metabolism breaks down these polysaccharide molecules into monosaccharides, which are converted into glucose. So we have candy now as glucose. And your body stores, your body's going to use that glucose, but that excess glucose will be stored as glycogen. And if the body can't store all of that glycogen, because the body can't store an unlimited amount of glycogen. The body's going to only store so much glycogen. And if you eat 14 pounds of candy on November 1st, the day after Halloween, you're going to have a bunch of glucose / glycogen that the body really can't use and store. So the rest of that glycogen is going to be used in this process called lipogenesis. Lipo is fat and genesis means to create. So we're going to create basically fat cells. We're going to take this glucose and glycogen and create fat. So this glycogen is converted into fats for storage, and this actually adds to your body fat content and adds to your weight. So that's how candy, excess candy or excess glucose, adds to your body fat or to your weight. All right, carbohydrate usage. So there are 3 ways that we can use carbohydrates, and we know them already. We just might not be able to articulate them, but I think that you know these. So we know that carbohydrates are broken down into glucose, and that we can use that glucose for cellular respiration, and the end products of cellular respiration are carbon dioxide, water, and energy. So we know the whole cellular respiration, that carbohydrates are used for cellular respiration. We know that carbohydrates are broken down into glucose, and that excess glucose is converted into glycogen by a process called glycogenesis, and that it's stored in the liver and the skeletal muscle cells. And I'll add skeletal, S-K-E-L-E, skeletal muscle cells. So that's number 2. And then as we need that energy, the glycogen, as we use up the glucose, that glycogen in the skeletal muscle cells and liver cells are going to replenish those glucose supplies as they're depleted. So we're going to take that glycogen and we're going to do this glycogenolysis. We're going to break up that glycogen into glucose and use that glucose once the glucose supplies are depleted. And then the third step is what we just talked about with the whole candy example. We have so much glycogen that we can store, And that excess glucose is going to be converted into fat by this process called lipogenesis. And we're going to store that glucose as by lipogenesis. It's going to be stored as adipose tissue or fat tissue. All right, and we can actually use that fat tissue for energy. So when we use that fat tissue for energy, we say it's a process called gluconeogenesis. So we're creating glucose. Gluco is glucose, neo is new, genesis is to create. So we're creating a new form of glucose. So remember, typically we create glucose from the breakdown of carbohydrates, but here we are creating glucose from a new pathway. In this case, we're breaking down or oxidizing fatty acids to create that glucose. So we're creating a new way to create energy. And remember I said at the beginning, we have, we can create glucose out of carbs, but we can also create glucose out of the lipids and the proteins for energy. And this is one of those ways. It's called gluconeogenesis, is basically the alternative way to create glucose. When we do the fatty acid pathway and when we do the protein pathway for creating glucose, it's gluconeogenesis, and basically it's how we create glucose from a non-carbohydrate source. So when we create glucose from amino acids, the protein side, or glycerol, the fatty acid side, to create glucose, we can use that glucose for as an energy source that can go into the whole cellular respiration process. That's gluconeogenesis. All right, and I will add that the nervous system, the central nervous system, does require a continuous supply of glucose for its energy. So we'll leave it at that. So the nervous system definitely requires a continuous supply of glucose for its energy to keep it functioning. All right, so here is just a pathway of kind of how we create or what happens with different carbohydrates. With carbohydrate digestion, we have starches, the sucrose, the disaccharide. So we have starch, which is that polysaccharide, and we have the disaccharides, sucrose, maltose, and lactose. We can break those down essentially into those monosaccharides, glucose, fructose, and galactose. And then they can go into one of three pathways: cellular respiration. So those monosaccharides can go, or specifically glucose, can go into that cellular respiration pathway, the glycogenesis pathway if we have too much glucose, or if we have too much glycogen, into the lipogenesis pathway to create fat storage. All right, so how much carbs or carbohydrates should we take in every day? So that's going to be, obviously this is varied depending on your activity level, your age, your sex. But basically you're going to need about 125 to 175 grams per day of carbohydrates. Now, because we live in the United States, we don't follow what is recommended, and typically we take in much more than what is required. We take in about 200 to 300 grams per day of carbohydrates. So what's going to happen? We take too many carbs, chances are we're going to go down that glycogen pathway, or most likely we're going to go down this lipogenesis pathway, which is why we see this lipogenesis pathway is where we see fat storage. So this is why this is going to lead to obesity. Ooh, I can't use my mouse to type. I need to figure out an easier way to type or to use my mouse, because obviously I'm not skilled at using my mouse to write. All right. Now with fats, with lipids, remember lipids are also organic compounds. They contain carbon and they contain hydrogen. So we have different types of fats and oils and phospholipids and cholesterol. If you remember way back from chapter 3, maybe chapter 4, somewhere around there, chapter 3, chapter 4, we find lipids a lot in that cellular membrane. Remember we had that lipid bilayer where we had the hydrophobic side on the outside and the hydrophobic side on the inside and the hydrophobic side on the outside. So we see a lot of lipid structures in the cell membrane. We saw cholesterol that was kind of built in the cell membrane. So triglycerides are basically composed of this glycerol backbone with 3 fatty acid side chains. So here you can see the glycerol backbone. And then in the purple, the purple is 1 fatty acid side chain, 2 fatty acid side chains, and 3 fatty acid side chains. So triglycerides are most commonly called fats, and they are dietary lipids. Typically, we're going to find these in the oils that we use for cooking. We also call it cholesterol. Triglycerides, we can further classify, triglycerides are found in both plant-based foods and animal-based foods, and we can break down triglycerides into saturated fats and unsaturated fats. So saturated fats, that's going to be more found with animal products, like with meat, eggs, milk, lard. If you don't know what lard is, ask your grandma. Not so much nowadays, but like my grandma used to cook with lard a lot. More of the older age grandmas, usually if people who are over 80 years old, they like to cook with lard. We don't see too many people cook with lard anymore just because of the bad health aspects of lard. We also find saturated fats in palm oil, coconut oils, and it says no double bonds between carbon atoms and fatty acids. And we'll get back to that statement in a second. But saturated fatty acids are associated with increased risk of cardiovascular disease. So saturated fats aren't necessarily good for you. So and like I said, we'll come back to this whole carbon double bond thing here in a second. Unsaturated fats, they're found in seeds, nuts, plant oil, so like vegetable oil, olive oil. They're going to be more healthy for you. And it says that they contain 1 or more double bonds between the carbon atoms. And I'll get back to that statement in a second. And we can classify unsaturated fats as monounsaturated fats, like olive oil, which are the healthiest. So monosaturated fats are the healthiest, and polyunsaturated fats have different classifications. And it says trans fats are the unhealthiest. So trans fats, those are going to be like your fried foods, like your deep fried foods. So like your fried chicken wings, your fried fish. All right, so now we're going to go into a little bit of organic chemistry. we're just going to talk a little bit about, this whole double bond thing. So, these lines, these lines just represent kind of like the chain. So, here we have, here it says palmitic acid, oleic acid, linoleic acid. So here is just a, here we would have the glycerol backbone. And then we would have a fatty acid side chain on kind of down here. Off to the side would be the fatty acid side chain. So anytime that I see a little bend in this line, so here, 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 every time I see a bend in that line, I would know that that would be a carbon atom. So I would see that all of these have carbon atoms. And because there's just a single line between these carbon atoms, there's a single bond there. Now, if I go to this second example, I see that there's a double line there. So that's a double bond. So this top example, palmitic acid, I would say that this is a saturated fat because it has single bonds. And if we go back to here, it says no double bonds between carbon atoms. So here, because it has no double bonds, it's a saturated fat. Here we have one double bond. So we would say mono 1 unsaturated fat. And it contains one or more double bond. Polyunsaturated fat would have multiple double bonds. So this one would be a mono, and this would be a polyunsaturated fat because I have a double bond here, a double bond here, a double bond here, and a double bond here. All right, so so the way that I remember is how do I remember if saturated, how do I remember if it's saturated or not saturated? So I remember saturated with single bonds. I put my S's together. Saturated with single bonds. So because this one has all single bonds, I'm going to say that this is saturated. It's saturated with single bonds. So here, that first example is a saturated fatty acid because all of these are single bonds. Now, because this second example does not contain all single bonds, it's not saturated with single bonds, it has a double bond, it is not a saturated fat. So now we're talking about an unsaturated fat. Now I have to look at, is it a monosaturated or a polysaturated? So we don't have a monosaturated or a polyunsaturated. We don't have a di-unsaturated fat. It's either one single or one double bond or more than one double bond. So here we would say that it has one double bond. So we would say it's monounsaturated because it's not saturated with single bonds. So we know it's an unsaturated fat. So here we have two double bonds. So we don't have a classification for something with two double bonds. We wouldn't say it's a di-unsaturated fat. It would fall under the polyunsaturated fat. Just like this example down here would be a polyunsaturated fat as well. And if we go back to this previous slide, that trans fats are fried foods, are the unhealthiest. We're not going to really You're not going to be tested on the chemical structure of trans fats. The only chemical structure that you're going to have to know is whether or not it contains a double bond or not. You're going to have to be able to say saturated fats only consist of single bonds. Unsaturated fats are monounsaturated. Unsaturated fats contain double bonds. Monounsaturated fats contain one double bond. Polyunsaturated fats have multiple double bonds. But I'm not even going to confuse you with the chemical structure of trans fats. Basically, it lies in the orientation of how the chemical structure comes off of the double bond. So all of these, we have a cis configuration, and we have a trans configuration, and basically all of these double bonds have a cis configuration. I'm not going to show you the trans configuration because this is not an organic chemistry class, and two, I just don't want to take the time to really confuse you even more. And basically, you don't have to know the organic chemistry configuration of a trans fatty acid or a trans fat. But you just have to know that trans fats are the unhealthiest. Yeah, they taste great, but they are the unhealthiest out there. All right, so cholesterol is a type of fat, so it is lipid soluble, therefore it's not water soluble. So in order to be transported in blood, it's going to need to be packaged in those mycel things that we talked about last chapter. So cholesterol is abundant in liver, egg yolk, in milk, butter, cheese, and meats. It's usually not found in plant-based foods. You can see the structure of cholesterol. You're not going to have to know the structure, but it is a steroid based structure, and that steroid based structure just means that it has these 4 different types of rings for cholesterol, and it has this hydroxyl group, this OH group, attached to it with a hydrocarbon side chain. I know this is an organic chemistry class, but hydrocarbon just means it has a bunch of hydrogens and carbons as this side chain. All right, so what do we use lipids for? We actually find lipids in a bunch of foods. We talked about the phospholipids, cholesterol, fats, triglycerides. Triglycerides are found in a bunch of your vegetable oils, but we can use lipids as an energy source. Remember that we have carbohydrates that go to glucose that we use for our energy source, but we can also use lipids for gluconeogenesis as an alternative source of energy. But we find that when we use lipids for energy, the energy that's provided by lipids is actually twice as much energy per gram as compared to carbohydrates or proteins, and we'll see the breakdown here in a second, or later on in this chapter. And we know that triglycerides are broken down into glycerol and fatty acids, and we saw that back up here. We have that glycerol backbone and those 3 fatty acid side chains. and that we know that glycerol, or that lipids are stored as fats in adipose tissue. Um, and glucose, remember, can be converted into fat molecules. So if we have too much glucose, that can't be stored as glycogen, that can be stored as adipose tissue. And the same goes for amino acids. If we have too much protein, that gets broken down into amino acids. If we have too much protein, that can also get converted into fat tissue or adipose tissue as well. And this is our lipid pathway, that, typically we will do fats that will go into the glycerol and the fatty acid side chains and to produce fat. But we can break down fats into that glycerol and that fatty acid side chain. That glycerol backbone, if we look at it, is just basically a bunch of carbons and hydrogens, and we can convert those carbons and hydrogens into glucose, which will be converted into acetyl-CoA, and those fatty acid side chains, which are basically a bunch of carbons, and those carbons will have hydrogens attached to them as well. So the carbons, hydrogens, and oxygens will get converted into this enzyme called acetyl-CoA, and get thrown into the citric acid cycle. And remember that glycolysis ends with glucose getting split into pyruvic acid, and that pyruvic acid goes from the cytoplasm into the mitochondria and gets converted into acetyl-CoA. And acetyl-CoA, or coenzyme A, is the start of the citric acid cycle. So we can take this fat and throw it, kind of convert it into acetyl-CoA and throw it into the citric acid cycle and use that for energy production in the aerobic respiration. Remember, citric acid cycle is aerobic. And then our end products, remember, from respiration are carbon dioxide, water, and energy in the form of either heat or creating ATP. And remember, we have 60% in the form of heat, 40% as ATP. All right, so when carbohydrates go through glycolysis to produce those two molecules of pyruvic acid, we know that. Fats go through a process called beta oxidation. And then fats from foods are hydrolyzed to glycerol to form fats from foods are hydrolyzed to glycerol and fatty acid, and that glycerol is converted to glucose, and fatty acids are converted to fats. And that fatty acids enter this beta oxidation cycle to produce the acetyl-CoA, which enters that citric acid cycle. And then we know that energy, carbon dioxide, and water are produced. All right, so lipid use. So the liver can convert fatty acids from one form to another. Remember that we have these things called essential nutrients. The liver can't synthesize certain fatty acids that we have to obtain from the diet itself. The lipids can combine with proteins to form these things called lipoproteins. And if you've ever had your blood drawn and they've drawn a cholesterol panel, that's what we're talking about. So these lipid plus proteins are lipoproteins, are classified based on their protein density. I should say, let's see, protein density. Um, so as the proportion of lipids decreases, the protein density increases, which makes sense. If you have lipids and proteins to form these lipoproteins, if you decrease your lipid concentration, you're going to increase your protein concentration. So we use these lipids to transport to specific target cells, and we have three different kinds. We have VLDL, LDL, and HDL. VLDL stands for very low density lipoprotein. So very low density lipoprotein. So very low density, which very low density would be we'll do a very low protein content, or a high triglyceride content. LDL stands for low density lipoprotein, or we could say low protein content. I spelled protein wrong. Low protein content, or we could say a high cholesterol content, or we could say a high triglyceride content. HDL is your high density content or high density lipoprotein. It's a high protein content or a low triglyceride content. So your HDL is what people often refer to as your good cholesterol. All right, more lipid use. Your liver is going to control your triglyceride level or your cholesterol level. It's produced by the liver and released into your bloodstream. And we can also use these to create your bile salts. Remember, your liver creates and stores your bile salts, and then it excretes bile. We have that gallbladder thing that goes in the hepatic duct and the cystic duct and all that stuff and gets released into the small intestine. The adipose tissue, or the fat tissue, is where all of your lipoproteins or your triglycerides are going to be stored, and they're going to be released when your body needs them. So here you can see your triglycerides. We digest your fats. And so we have that glycerol, and your fatty acids are going to go to your liver, and your liver is going to create triglycerides, which are your glycerol backbone plus your three fatty acid side chains. They're also going to create these lipoproteins, your HDL, your LDL, and your VLDL. They're also going to create these fatty acids, except your essential fatty acids, because remember, your body can't synthesize fatty acids. Your liver also creates cholesterol and phospholipids. All right, so lipid requirements. Again, it depends on who you are as to what your body requires. However, the American Heart Association says that your diet should not exceed 30% of your calories from fats. And that your fats should be more on the healthy side. So your mono unsaturated fats, such as, the avocados, your olives, your vegetable oil, your olive oil, are going to be healthier than your saturated fats like butter or lard, or are healthier than unsaturated fats, or your poly, or let's say your trans fats which are your fried foods. Fried foods. All right, and we do have to have enough fat intake to support the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins. And, fat-soluble vitamins, whoa, I don't know how we got that color in there, so we'll just do that. Fat-soluble vitamins are vitamins A, D, E, and K. Got the hiccups. All right. Proteins. Proteins, remember, are just chains of amino acids. You break down proteins, you get amino acids. Remember that amino acids make new proteins, structural proteins, enzymes. All of your hormones that are in your bodies are basically proteins. Antibodies, all of your clotting factors that we talked about, that clotting cascade a few chapters ago, all of those are proteins. Your plasma proteins, albumins, gamma globulins, those are proteins. Proteins can also supply energy just like carbs and fats can. We'll look at the structure of an amino acid later on if you don't remember what it is, but it has that, we're going to break down proteins and amino acids. And remember, those amino acids have that NH2 group on them. We remove that NH2 group through this process called deamination. So when we remove that NH2 group, we say we are deaminating that amino acid. And we see this deamination process when we break down or when we catabolize proteins to use them for energy. And then those proteins can react to form urea, which is then excreted in the urine. And then also these deaminated portions of amino acids can be decomposed through various pathways that produce ATP. One is the citric acid cycle that we saw on the fatty acid side. And then excess amino acids can also be converted into glucose or fats, lipogenesis. I'll put that on there. Lipogenesis. All right, so here, proteins, we have proteins get broken down into amino acids, and, amino acids make up structural proteins, enzymes, hormones, plasma proteins, and then amino acids. When we do the whole deamination process, we can convert those into glucose, which can be used for cellular respiration, or we can convert those into fat via lipogenesis. And we saw this slide last chapter. And again, this slide again is definitely not all inclusive. There's a lot more to protein metabolism than what this slide represents, but for the purposes of entry-level anatomy and physiology, these are kind of the essentials that you need to know. So we have, this huge protein molecule, and we know that pepsin is going to break down proteins into polypeptides, and polypeptides are just long chains of amino acids, and we have this enzyme called enteropeptase that converts trypsin into trypsin, and then trypsin converts this chymotrypsinogen into chymotrypsin, and that trypsin and chymotrypsin breaks the polypeptides into smaller chains, more usable chains of amino acids. And then this carboxypeptidase breaks down the peptides into single amino acids. They're going to break down these peptide bonds. And this is the general structure of an amino acid. We have the amine group here, the carboxyl group on this side, and this R group, this variable group, is going to be what makes the amino acid different from one amino acid to another. And when we remove this amine group, that's deamination that we saw a few slides ago. Okay, so this is the pathway for proteins. Proteins we take, we eat our Big Mac, our Taco Bell, and we have this hydrolysis reaction. We're going to break down proteins into amino acids. And and at that point, these amino acids undergo this deamination process, or the removal of this amine group, and that NH2 group may act as a source of urea, but the deaminated portions by various pathways can produce fat and glucose. So if we go down this pathway, we can produce fat and glucose. And we're not going to go into how fat and glucose are produced. That's above this level of class. But some of and here on this side, we already talked about how deamination goes to urea. We're not going to talk about the physiology or the organic chemistry behind how amino acids get converted into urea. That's again above this class. But proteins again can form the acetyl coenzyme A, or get converted into acetyl coenzyme A, which are going to, remember, go into the mitochondria and enter the citric acid cycle to perform aerobic respiration, to perform cellular respiration, to produce energy, carbon dioxide and water, and ATP and heat. All right, so protein sources. I think we all know that protein comes from meats, fish, chicken, poultry, turkey, cheeses, nuts, milks, eggs. All of those are high in protein. Legumes. A lot of people don't know what legumes are. Those are just beans and peas. They're still a good vegetarian option for protein, but they contain less protein, but they are good non-meat sources of protein. And remember, I said that there are 20 types of amino acids that help synthesize different proteins in our body. Of those 20, 12 can be synthesized by the body. We call those non-essential amino acids. But however, 8 of those amino acids are called essential amino acids. So we have to bring those into our body by the food that we eat. And they are not stored in the body because we have to bring those in through our diet. Now, proteins that require amino acids to be produced, let's say that the protein requires proteins are going to require all 20 amino acids, all 20 amino acids have to be present in order for protein synthesis to occur. If one amino acid is missing, then protein synthesis or amino acid synthesis will not occur. So your body has to have all 20 amino acids in order to allow for protein synthesis to happen. And remember that I said, our textbook says 20 amino acids and 8 are essential. You'll see some textbooks that say 22 amino acids are out there and that 9 are essential. All right, so protein sources, we have these things called complete proteins and incomplete proteins. Complete proteins, they're very high quality. They have a lot of the essential amino acids out there. Um, um, those are going to be your meats, milks, and eggs. Incomplete proteins, we call them low quality proteins. Even though they're still good proteins, they don't necessarily contain a lot of the essential amino acids that your body needs. So those are going to be more in your plant proteins or your non-meat sourced proteins. So you might have to eat more or a different variety of your plant-based proteins or a different variety of your incomplete proteins in order to come up with the same variety of proteins that you would find in your complete proteins. So like here, a certain combination of plant proteins provide adequate diversity of the dietary amino acids. So if you eat a lot of beans and rice, you're going to need a lot of variety of your beans in order to come up with all of your essential amino acids. All right, and this is just a list of your amino acids. You do not have to memorize the list of amino acids. The ones that are designated with the E, those are your essential amino acids. Remember, essential amino acids are the ones that cannot be synthesized by your body. You have to take those in through your diet. So tyrosine would be a non-essential amino acid. And the two up top, arginine and histidine, those are additional essential amino acids in children only. But once you become an adult, they can be synthesized in an adult, but not a child. All right, nitrogen balance. So if we go back to our slide here, we know that we see nitrogen in protein right here. So proteins have nitrogen. And when we break down protein, proteins are broken down and constantly being built up in our body 24/7. And we eat a lot of protein. So we have to maintain that balance in our body. And overall, we should take in enough protein to equal the amount of protein that our body's using. And if we do that, we are in a state that's called dynamic equilibrium. That just means what we take in equals what we are using. So our overall net nitrogen is going to be 0. And I'm just going to make it simple, if we take in 100 nitrogens and we use 100 nitrogens, our overall nitrogen is 0. But if we take in 200 nitrogens and we only use 100, we have 100 nitrogens left over, so we're going to have a positive nitrogen balance. Or if we're in a protein, let's say we starve ourselves of protein, so we only take in 50 nitrogens and we use 100 nitrogens, we're going to be left with negative 50, so we're in a negative nitrogen balance. We have to watch our nitrogen balance, and like I said, we hopefully have this dynamic equilibrium where what we take in equals the amount that we use or excrete. So if we starve ourselves of protein, we're going to create a negative nitrogen balance. So we're using more nitrogen than we take in. and our excretion exceeds dietary intake. So we are expending more amino acids than we are accumulating. So here we are, and again, I'm just making up numbers because it's easier. And these numbers have no meaningful value. I'm just making up, like I said, making up numbers. So let's say we are only taking in 50, but we are using 100. We have a net loss of 50 amino acids. On the flip side, if we have a positive nitrogen balance, we are taking in more nitrogen than we are using, so we are going to have a balance of a positive balance of 50. Now, there are conditions where you would want a positive nitrogen balance. You want more protein than you are using or than you are excreting. When you are going through growth spurts, you're going to eat a lot of protein because you need that extra protein. You need those extra nitrogens in order to build up, in order to get more amino acids, to make more amino acids in order to grow your bones and your muscles. Pregnant women, they have a developing fetus inside of them. They're going to need more nitrogens. Athletes that are actively training. I think it came out that Michael Phelps, when he was actively training, ate between 20,000 and 30,000 calories per day, and most of that was protein. So obviously he's going to have a positive nitrogen balance. So we want that positive nitrogen balance to help build new tissues. If you're actively trying to put on muscle mass, you're gonna use protein powder before you go work out to try and get that positive protein balance. So your energy, your protein intake is going to exceed that energy use and excretion in hopes that your body is going to use those excess amino acids, those excess nitrogen to build up your body tissues. All right, so protein requirements. Again, protein is used for supplying the essential amino acids, as well as your non-essential amino acids, and also non-protein nitrogenous substances. Because remember, we can deaminate those proteins and use those nitrogens for those non-protein nitrogenous substances. Again, your protein intake is going to vary according to your body size, metabolic rate, your nitrogen balance, but your typical protein intake should be only about 10% of your diet, or about 0.8 grams per kilogram of your body weight, or 0.4 grams per pound of your body weight. So let's say that you weigh 150 pounds. You should only be bringing in 60 grams of protein per day. And most people should consume around 60 to 150 grams of protein per day, which translates to about 2 to 5 ounces of protein per day. Now, when we see protein starvation, or if we have protein deficiency, that can lead to tissue wasting. So let's say you're starving yourself of protein, you're going to have a decline in your plasma proteins, which would make sense because if you overall don't bring in enough protein, you're not going to have enough protein in your blood. You're not going to have enough albumin, gamma globulins. You're not going to have enough protein in your blood. And you remember that slide that I keep referring to that has the arterioles on one end, the venules on the other end, and you have 17 liters coming out, or 20 liters pushed out, and 17 liters come back in. You have a net of 3 liters that the lymphatic system picks up. So if you had that slide pictured in your mind, remember we have that hydrostatic pressure that pulls fluid out, that 20 liters of fluid out, and we also have that colloid osmotic pressure that helps pull that fluid back in, that 17 liters of fluid per day. That colloid osmotic pressure is due to the proteins in the bloodstream. Well, if we starve ourselves from protein, or if we starve ourselves from eating with proteins, then we're going to not have enough proteins in our bloodstream. Therefore, we're going to see a decreased plasma oncotic pressure or osmotic pressure, a decreased colloid osmotic pressure, or a decreased plasma colloid osmotic pressure, a decreased osmotic pressure, or however you want to say it. Or you could just say a decreased protein pressure in the bloodstream. So we're still going to throw out about 20 liters per day on the arterial end, but we're not going to pull in that 17 liters a day, because remember, on the venule end, that force is going to be more of the protein pressure pulling in that fluid, that 17 liters a day. And if we're starving ourselves of protein, we're not going to be pulling in that as much fluid because we have starved ourselves from protein. And if we're not pulling in enough fluid, you're going to have the fluid just kind of sitting out there in that interstitial space. And that's going to lead to a condition called edema. And edema is just basically fluid in the interstitial space. All right, so here, just your nutrient requirements, carbs, 225 to 325, 44 to 78 for lipids, proteins, 50 to 175. All right, so I wanted to add a little bit more to the slide based on what the previous slide said. 30%. So even though it says 225 to 325 grams, in the previous slides it says 125 to 175 grams minimum, and that most adults in the United States consume between 200 to 300 grams per day. Obviously, because there's a lot of discrepancies in what you read, I'm actually going to kind of get rid of this statement and just kind of leave it at that. And of course, you're not going to have to know you're not going to have to know these numbers, especially because they're going to be different depending on what source you find. With lipids, 44 to 78 grams of fats per day. Obviously, you want more of the good fats and not the bad fats. So some of your monounsaturated fats are going to be better than your trans fats or your saturated fats. But remember, fats should be no more than 30% of your diet. With proteins, between 50 and 175 grams, should be no more than 10% of your diet. And a rough calculation, 0.8 grams per kilogram or 0.4 grams per pound of body weight. And the previous slide said between 60 and 150 grams per day, or 2 to 5 ounces per day. So I'm just going to get rid of, there we go. So I'm going to get rid of that statement, and we'll just kind of move. We'll move that one. Maybe we'll move this one up. Um, all right. So now, remember that, well, okay, so also calories per gram. So carbohydrates and proteins will give you 4.1 calories per gram, whereas fats will give you 9.5 calories per gram. And remember that I said that fats will, um, there is a statement up here that said fats contain more than twice as much chemical energy per gram as carbohydrates or proteins. That is shown right here. So this 4.1 versus the 9.5. So it's actually more than twice. So that's why we don't want to eat as much fat, because it will, it kind of, it doesn't, I don't want to say it weighs more, but it will, I'll say it's weighted more in that it gives you more energy. So it doesn't take as much fat to provide as much energy. So if you're looking at weight loss, go with the carbohydrates and proteins, because, a pound of fat is going to weigh the same as a pound of carbohydrates. A pound of protein is going to weigh the same as a pound of fat. So, so the expenditure that you're going to get out of carbs and proteins is going to be more than than it is out of fats. All right, so energy expenditures. We can use, as we've seen, we can use carbs, fats, and proteins for all our metabolic processes. We're going to use carbs as our first line for glucose, but we can convert fats and proteins into glucose and use that for cellular respiration. But if we are lacking in one, let's say we go on a carbohydrate starvation diet, and our body's going to use fats and proteins to supplement for what we're lacking in carbs. If we go on a protein starvation diet, our body's going to find a way to use proteins because it has to have proteins in order to survive. And we're not just talking about cellular respiration. Proteins are essential for building up hormones and enzymes and structural proteins. So if we have a deficiency, if we go on a protein starvation diet, your body will start to break down muscle tissue to produce the enzymes and hormones that the body needs. And eventually, if left untreated and if you continue this diet long enough, it can result in death. So your body needs fats, your body needs carbs, and your body needs proteins in order to survive. And excesses of anything will lead to obesity. We saw with the excess glucose can get converted into fat, excess proteins get converted into fat, and obviously excess fat gets converted into fat. So now the energy value of food, we call those calories. And we've all heard the term calories, but basically a calorie is a unit of heat. And we have this thing called a bomb calorimeter. I'll just show you a picture. This is basically a bomb calorimeter. And we know that, carbohydrates give us this 4.1 calories per gram, proteins is 4.1, and lipids are 9.5 calories per gram. So what happens with this bomb calorimeter? The innermost chamber, This is where kind of we put our food particles in there, and it's surrounded by water, and then has this compartment of airspace, and it has an outer insulation, and the food samples in this like little platinum dish, and then we have this little thermometer in there. We have these electrical wires that we're actually going to ignite this food sample, and we have this little stir thing, and basically what we're going to do is we're going to see how much energy it's going to take to basically how much heat is going to be required to raise the temperature of 1 kilogram of water by 1 degree Celsius. So this whole bomb calorimeter thing is basically what we're doing with this experiment is we're going to figure out the amount of heat required to raise the temperature of 1 kilogram of water by 1 degree Celsius. When we come up with that number, we call that a large calorie We also call that a kilocalorie or a kilocalorie. So a large calorie or a kilocalorie is going to equal the amount of heat required to raise the temperature of a kilogram of water by 1 degree Celsius. So when we convert that into something usable that we know, one large, let me do, one large calorie is going to equal 1,000 small calories. And I should put all of these large and smalls in parentheses, only because it's not necessarily the term large or the term small. See how calorie is capitalized and calorie is not capitalized? So here, when I say large, I'm saying that calorie is capitalized, large calorie is capitalized, and small calorie is not capitalized. So when I say large, that means calorie is capitalized. So when we have, if we're talking about a calorie, and I'll abbreviate it CAL, we're talking about a kilocalorie. And that's what is required to, the amount of heat required to raise the temperature of 1 kilogram of water by 1 degree Celsius. And 1 calorie, capital C, is going to equal 1,000 calories, lowercase c. So when I usually say it, I say 1 large calorie equals 1,000 small calories. And that allows me to designate, is it a capital C calorie or a lowercase c calorie? And that's a little bit confusing because we're saying calorie and we're saying calorie, but just by saying calorie, you don't know if it's a capital C calorie or a lowercase c calorie. So maybe we should only talk about kilocalories to mean the capital C calorie. And if I say calorie, maybe calorie should just mean the lowercase c calorie. But, we don't. So you kind of have to know, is it a capital C calorie or a lowercase c calorie? So on the exam, and when you see when you look at the back of the food label, you're going to see something that says 110 calories. All right, so on the food label, you're going to see 110 calories with a capital C, or you're going to see 250 calories with a capital C. That means kilocalories. So now we're talking about the big calories, the large calories. We're not talking about the small calories. So there is going to be one math question on the test. You're not going to need your calculator for it. It will just talk about, you're going to have to know the difference between the uppercase C and the lowercase c. And it's going to say something like, you have 25 calories equals how many uppercase calories. And all you would do is just multiply this by 1,000. So you would say 25. No, I did that backwards. Nope. Let me erase all that. Sorry. So like I said, you're going to have to know the difference between the big C and the low C. So you're going to have a question that's going to be, you have 25, let's say you have 250 big calories, and you're going to have to say how many small calories are on there, and you just multiply it by 1,000, so 250 lowercase calories. And that's really all you have to do. So just know the difference between the lowercase c and the uppercase c. But what you read on the food label is going to be the uppercase c or the kilocalories. All right, basal metabolic rate. Your BMR is basically how much energy you use if you're a couch potato and not doing anything. How much energy are you using just by resting, fasting, breathing, going to the bathroom, doing all of your internal processes, what's going on inside your body, and really not expending any energy. So obviously it takes energy for your body to run during the day. So that's your basal metabolic rate. How much energy does it require for your body to kind of maintain itself on a daily basis while you are at rest? and you are in a comfortable environment, you're not really doing any type of physical activity. So basically, all you need is to support the activity of your body, your organs, what's going on in your body. It's going to vary with gender, body size, body temperature, your endocrine system activity, specifically your thyroid gland, your body temperature. So your body's actually going to work a little bit in overtime with a higher body temperature. And your body's going to work, it's going to be more restful with a lower body temperature. With body size, if you are on the overweight, obese side, your body's going to use more energy than it is if you are physically fit or if you are underweight. All right, we know energy is needed in the body to maintain BMR, support your muscular activity, support body temperature for growth, development. Body energy is needed for a lot of things in our body. So activity level. How many calories do you use for certain activities? You can see if you walk up the stairs for an hour, you go to Planet Fitness and you walk up the stairs, you'll burn 1,100 calories on average an hour. If you run or jog for an hour, on average, you'll burn about 570 calories, swimming about 500 calories an hour. Vigorous exercise, slow walking, dressing and undressing, or if you actually just sit there and be a couch potato, you're actually burning about 100 calories per hour. So congratulations. So you will need to know the activity and calories per hour for running, swimming, slow walking, and sitting at rest. Those are the ones that you're going to have to memorize, and also be prepared to do math. So here we're given this as in calories per hour, but the question might ask for 30 minutes. So, if you are swimming for a half hour, you might only burn 250 calories. Or it might ask for 2 hours. So if you're vigorously exercising for 2 hours, you're going to burn 900 calories. And in order to lose weight, the standard rule of thumb is that you're going to have to cut about 500 calories per day. So over 7 days, 500 calories per day for 7 days to lose about 1 pound of fat per week. Now, you can do this in combination with diet and or exercise. So you don't have to necessarily exercise in order to lose weight. And you don't have to necessarily you don't have to just cut calories out of your diet. You don't have to just exercise in order to lose weight. Obviously, the recommendations of diet is to follow a well-balanced diet and exercise in order to lose weight. But theoretically, you could eat, 10,000 calories in a day and still lose weight as long as you are burning more calories than you take in. Obviously adjusting for your BMR as well. But as long as you have are cutting about 500 calories per day times 7 days in a row, that will help you lose 1 pound of fat per week. So if we are burning let's say we are burning 1,000 calories per day swimming. And we do that for 7 days. That would allow us to lose 2 pounds of fat in a week. If we eat 1,000 fewer calories per day, theoretically, we would lose 2 pounds of fat per week. Now, if we burn 1,000 calories during exercise 3 times a week, and we eat an extra 200 calories per day, are we going to lose weight? Well, no. Because remember the stipulation, you would have to cut about 500 calories per day to lose 1 pound of fat per week. And here it says we are burning 1,000 calories during exercise 3 times a week, but we are eating an extra 200 calories per day. So because we're not exercising 7 times a day, we would not be losing any weight. Burning 500 calories a day by running. If we did that 7 days a week, yes, we would lose a pound of fat in a week. Eating 500 fewer calories a day, yes, that would allow us to lose weight. All right, so we talked earlier about the nitrogen balance. So now we're going to talk about energy balance. And a lot of this is self-explanatory. We have our BMR, which is, our energy requirements when our body's pretty much at rest. And our body weight is going to remain relatively constant. And if we take in more calories than we burn, we have a positive energy balance. Therefore, our tissues are going to store those excess nutrients, and that's going to lead to weight gain. And on the flip side, when we have a negative energy balance, we are burning more calories than we are taking in. We are breaking down tissues to use for energy, which is going to lead to weight loss. All right. What is our desired weight? Well, that's going to be very difficult to determine. We have the BMI scale, that body mass index scale. And when you talk to nutritionists, they're going to say that first, a lot of your nutritional disorders involve caloric imbalances, and people who are anorexic or people who do suffer, mental diseases that involve weight, they're really fixated on caloric intake versus expenditure. So I don't want this, and I know I have someone in my family who fell into this trap of basically writing everything that she put into her body versus everything that came out of her body, and was trying to get down to that exact calorie of intake versus output, and went down the rabbit hole, and it was not good and not healthy for her. So I do think that sometimes, and especially in nutrition class, we might focus too much on this whole maintaining a healthy weight, because this whole, especially with a BMI, because BMI doesn't look at a lot of things. All all it will do is look at your height versus your weight, but it doesn't take into account muscle mass. So if you have, if you're this big bodybuilder, with biceps this big around, and you have 0% body fat on you, your BMI will show that you are obese, even though you're not. If you have big bones, and we sometimes say, oh, she's big boned, or he's big boned, as opposed to saying they're fat, or they're obese. There are people out there who do have big bones or big muscle mass, and that they are not necessarily obese or overweight. But according to the BMI scale, they would be overweight or obese, because the BMI only looks at your height versus weight and doesn't take into account any type of bone structure or muscle mass. So I'll do bone structure or muscle mass under account. And the BMI index also, it'll exaggerate the thinness in short people and the fatness in tall people. So because of that, this BMI index is, I think as of last year, is no longer considered the first tool that nutritionists go for, or that doctors go to when looking at people who are overweight or classifying people as overweight. So I'm glad for that. So like I said, BMI measures the weight in versus their height to classify individuals as either overweight, underweight, healthy weight, or obese. And let's see, I'm actually going to do that. There we go. So if we look at the height versus weight, and your BMI is 13 to 18, you're considered underweight. If your BMI is 19 to 24, you're at a healthy weight. BMI of 25 to 30 is overweight. Or we could say that you're exceeding your desired weight by 10 to 20%. A BMI over 30, you're technically obese, according to the BMI chart. Or we could say obese is exceeding your desired weight by 20% or more. But we could also say that obesity is excess adipose tissue. All right. If we are looking at the BMI chart itself, you can see, here's the formula. If you are looking at, if you have pounds versus kilograms, here's your formula in pounds: 703 times the weight divided by the height divided by the height. In kilograms, it would be the weight divided by the height divided by the height. Usually if we have a weight in pounds, the height would be in inches. If the weight is in kilograms, the height would be in meters. So if we have a person that is 190 pounds and is 6 feet tall, according to, if we do the calculations, 703 times 190 divided by 72 is 25.77, or rounded up would be 26. Or what we can do is look at 190 and 6 feet tall. So if we do 190 and 6 feet tall, so if we look at 190 and 6 feet, we see that the person has a BMI of 26. So that's correct. So for the weight, 90.7 and 1.63 meters. So 90.7 divided by 1.63 divided by 1.63. Your BMI is 34.13, which is obese. And this chart is actually measured in pounds and inches. You can Google a BMI chart in you can Google the BMI chart in kilograms and meters if you want. But I'll tell you, for our exam purposes, everything is going to be pounds and inches. Let's see. You will not have to mathematically calculate anything. I will put this chart on the exam for you so that you can kind of, do your number here and do your number here and do your little drop down and figure out what the BMI is. So you'll have access to this chart for the exam. All right, obesity. So about a third of the adults in the United States are classified as obese, not necessarily from the BMI scale, but remember that if we go back to this slide, exceeding 20% of your desired weight, more than 20%. So obesity, as I'm sure you're aware, increases your risk for type 2 diabetes, also digestive disorders like reflux disease, heart disease, kidney failure, hypertension, stroke, and cancers. Obesity can be classified as a hereditary disorder, but also environmental factors can contribute to obesity. Certain genes are involved with control of hunger, and as well as hormones by the hypothalamus. We talked about ghrelin and leptin in previous chapter about satiety and that hunger feeling. So treatments, obviously diet and exercise, and we talked about losing 1 pound of fat per week by burning 500 calories or limiting 500 calories per day from your diet, whether it be in combination of diet and exercise, or diet alone, or exercise alone. Drug therapy, today it seems like Ozempic is the big craze. Just be careful about using drugs that are medications that are not labeled for their use, because they are not studied for those conditions that people are using them for. So we don't know the long-term effects of using Ozempic for weight loss. And then of course we have bariatric surgery. There's actually 3 types of bariatric surgery that we can do to treat obesity. Here's our ghrelin and leptin. I thought we talked about it last chapter, but here it is for this chapter. So appetite. Your appetite is what compels us to seek out food. It's located in the that center is located in the hypothalamus, and it's under control of different hormones or neurotransmitters. We have insulin that's secreted by the pancreas after we eat, and that's going to stimulate the adipocytes, or your fat cells, to take up glucose, and that's going to be what stores our fat. Insulin stimulates the other cells as well to take up glucose, and also stores glycogen, which is the glucose, the storage of glucose. Leptin is a hormone that's secreted by those adipocytes um, during our eating, and that's going to act on the hypothalamus to suppress our appetite. It's going to tell our brain when we are full, and it takes a little while to work. So you don't necessarily know you're full when you are actually full. It's gonna, you might overeat, and then 20 minutes later, you're like, oh my God, I overate. That's because it takes a little bit of time for leptin and this neuropeptide Y that we'll talk about in a second to work. And leptin inhibits the release of neuropeptide Y. Neuropeptide Y is secreted by the hypothalamus in response to ghrelin to stimulate appetite. So ghrelin is secreted by the stomach, and it causes the secretion of neuropeptide Y to make you feel hungry. And if you inhibit ghrelin, this could actually help in weight loss. One of the hormones that's not on here, and it really doesn't have anything to do with appetite control, but it's called adiponectin. Adiponectin is a hormone secreted by fat cells. It reduces inflammation and atherogenesis. Atherogenesis is just basically formation of fat deposits in the arteries. It can also enhance the response of target cells to insulin. So it's going to help with insulin sensitivity and inflammation. So you also need to think about what happens if you have an undersecretion or oversecretion of these hormones. So like for insulin, if you have an oversecretion, that would be called hyperinsulinemia. Hyper means over, insulin is insulin, and emia means a condition in the blood. So, this is hyperinsulinemia. This is associated with type 2 diabetes and insulin resistance. So in a normal individual, this would lead to hypoglycemia. And an undersecretion of insulin is what hypoinsulinemia is, what we see in type 1 diabetes. This is where the pancreas can't provide insulin sufficiently to meet the body's needs. For leptin, the level of leptin in your blood is directly related to how much adipose tissue or body fat that you have. Too much leptin, hyperleptinemia, can result in obesity, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. It's called hepatosteatosis. It can lead to this thing called Rabson-Mendenhall syndrome. We're not going to talk about that. Different neurodegenerative disorders, depression, food addiction, undersecretion, or hypoleptinemia. It's a very rare and is usually a congenital condition. This leptin deficiency makes your body think that it has no body fat, and it can falsely trigger hunger and food consumption. This would result in obesity, and it can be associated with delayed puberty, frequent bacterial infections, hyperinsulinemia, fatty liver disease, dyslipidemia, which is an imbalance of lipids like triglycerides and cholesterol. It could also result in hypogonadotropic hypogonadism, which is basically low sex hormones. Neuropeptide Y, if you have an increase in neuropeptide Y, it's seen in times of stress. It can contribute to irregular menstrual cycles. Decrease of neuropeptide Y associated with depression, anxiety, Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, gastroparesis, alcoholism, the aging process. Ghrelin, increased levels of ghrelin can be seen during times of fasting and dieting, when the stomach is empty. That makes you feel hungry. Levels of ghrelin are increased by those people who eat more fiber on a regular basis. Fructose, remember, is a monosaccharide. It can stimulate ghrelin production. Also, poor sleep patterns and estrogen can stimulate ghrelin production. Decreased levels of ghrelin may decrease a person's appetite and can prevent weight gain and promote weight loss. All right, so here are just the 4 things that we just talked about. Um, so, um, yeah. Um, all right. Appetite control with leptin and ghrelin. So when you have an excessive appetite, food take is in excess of caloric need. Adipocytes synthesize fat and secrete leptin in the bloodstream. Leptin increases your metabolic rate. Leptin inhibits neuropeptide release from the hypothalamus. Appetite is suppressed when appetite is insufficient, such as in fasting. Cells in the stomach secrete ghrelin into the bloodstream. Ghrelin stimulates the release of neuropeptide Y from the hypothalamus, and appetite is enhanced. Sorry, I didn't advance your slide. All right. All right, so vitamins. Remember, vitamins are just organic compounds containing hydrogen and oxygen. They're required in small amounts. They are micronutrients and they are essential. They cannot be synthesized from the body. They have to be taken in from our diet. We can classify the vitamins based on their solubility. You know, your fat soluble vitamins are A, D, E, and K. Water soluble vitamins are going to be your B complex vitamins and vitamin C. Just some general facts and fictions that people go around touting. So, you know, some of the things that you hear, you know, the more vitamins, the better. Well, that's not actually true. You know, too much water soluble vitamins aren't going to do anything for you. They're water soluble, so if you take too much water soluble vitamins, you're just going to pee them out. And if you take too many fat soluble vitamins, they're just going to build up, and eventually over time they can cause detrimental effects because you're going to have too much of that vitamin stored in your body. Remember, your fat soluble vitamins are stored in your body. My aunt is one of those people that, you know, you get sick and she takes too much. She'll double up on her vitamin C because, you know, vitamin C helps you when you get sick. Well, it's not going to do anything for you. Your body's going to use what it can use, and it's going to pee out the rest. All right. Another fallacy is that a varied diet provides all needed vitamins. Not necessarily true, but many people do benefit from vitamin supplements, especially if you're pregnant or breastfeeding. You know, if you're pregnant, they put you on, you know, folic acid and the prenatal vitamins because your diet doesn't necessarily provide everything that you need, and you might need that extra boost. Postmenopausal women or perimenopausal women get put on hormone supplements or vitamin supplements. If you're prone to osteoporosis, you're going to get put on some sort of like calcium vitamin D supplements. Another big fallacy is that vitamins provide energy. Vitamins do not provide energy. However, they do release the energy from carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. So they help release the energy, but they do not provide the energy itself. Cells will preferentially use carbohydrates as their energy source, not supplements. Supplements, vitamins, will help extract the energy from the micronutrients. All right, remember fat soluble vitamins are your A, D, E, and K. They are fat soluble, they dissolve in fats. Uh, Let's see. They're resistant to heat, so they're not often destroyed by cooking or food processing. They are stored in various tissues, so that's why you don't want to take too many fat soluble vitamins, because they do get stored in your tissue. Like, for example, vitamin A is stored in your liver, so if you eat too many carrots, you can have the carrots contain beta carotene, which is like vitamin A, and over time your skin can turn orange. And it might take years for your signs and symptoms to show up, especially like if you have a deficiency, or if you have hypo or hyper, whatever the vitamin is. It could take years for that deficiency or that excess to become noticeable. All right, so for your fat soluble vitamins, vitamin A, D, E, and K, here you can just see the vitamins, the characteristics, the functions, some sources of where you can find these different vitamins, and how many. What's the RDA recommendation, the recommended daily allowance? IU is this international units. It's kind of like milligrams, micrograms, grams. We just say IU, international units. It's just a unit. And then what happens if you have an excess or a deficiency of vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin K. So while you don't need to memorize this whole chart, you do have to know some of these. You're going to have to know the characteristics of vitamin A. You're going to have to know the functions of vitamin A. You're going to have to know the deficiencies of vitamin A. You're going to have to know the deficiencies of vitamin D. You're going to have to know the excess of vitamin D. You're going to have to know the functions of vitamin D. And you're going to have to know what happens if you have an excess of vitamin E. Also, there is a class of antibiotics called cephalosporins. And if you work in the medicine field, you might have heard of cefazolin, cephalexin, cefoxidin, cefaclor, cefoxidin, cefatine, ceftriaxone, cefixime, ceftonir, others. Anyway, they reduce these cephalosporins. They reduce the amount of absorption of vitamin K in the body. And so cephalosporins not only kill the harmful bacteria in the body, but also the bacteria that make vitamin K. So in other words, treatment with these cephalosporins or these antibiotic drugs is sometimes followed by a deficiency of vitamin K, because cephalosporins kill off the bacteria that make vitamin K. All right, so your water-soluble vitamins, your B vitamins and vitamin C. Cooking and food processing will destroy those vitamins, so they are not resistant to heat. and processing. Your B vitamins are going to be found in normal cellular metabolism. B vitamins are usually found in the same types of foods, so that's why we call them the B complex vitamins. But all your B vitamins are going to be found in oxidation of carbs, lipids, and proteins. So here are just this slide and the next slide are your B vitamins and your C vitamins. So on this slide, you're going to need to know, let's see, your pantothenoic acid functions. You're going to need to know niacin excess, niacin deficiencies. Let's see, on this slide, you will need to know cyanocobalamin, also your B12. You're going to need to know some of the characteristics, deficiencies. One thing that I will add, not necessarily a function, but we had this thing, if you remember from the clotting cascade, called intrinsic factor. Intrinsic factor is very important in the absorption of vitamin B12 or cyanocobalamin. So just remember that intrinsic factor is important in the absorption of B12. Ascorbic acid, you're going to need to, which is just vitamin C. You're going to need to know the functions of ascorbic acid. All right, minerals. Minerals are inorganic compounds. So remember, organic is carbon, hydrogen. Inorganic compounds are not carbon, hydrogen. They're usually found in soil, so plant-based products or animals that have eaten plants. They usually make up about 4% of our diet or bone weight. So calcium, phosphorus, our iron and hemoglobin, a lot of our inorganic compounds, our ions that are in the blood, sodium, chloride, magnesium, calcium, our structural materials, our cellular membranes, have roles in muscle contraction, calcium, nerve impulse conduction, calcium, blood coagulation, pH regulation, that's hydrogen. All right, homeostatic, so this is just kind of like continued, some more characteristics. Homeostatic mechanisms regulate concentration of minerals in body fluids. And if we ingest too much of a mineral, it can be bad. So some of the minerals, we have macro minerals that can account for 0.05% or more of our body weight. So calcium, phosphorus, those are going to be the big ones. Potassium, sodium are going to be big ones. And then sulfur, chloride, and magnesium are the not so big ones. But calcium and phosphorus are the two big ones. They're going to make up about 75% of the mineral elements of our body by weight. Only because those are our skeletal system. So here you can see calcium and phosphorus. Potassium, you're going to have to know the calcium excess. I want you to know potassium deficiencies. On this slide, sulfur, sodium, chloride, magnesium. Definitely know magnesium functions. We also have trace elements, which are going to make up less than 0.005% of our body weight. Iron, which is found in hemoglobin, manganese, copper, iodine, cobalt, zinc, fluoride, selenium, and chromium. Here, I want you to know some of the iron functions. On this slide, you really don't need to know any of the functions on this slide, or you don't need to know anything on this slide. Dietary supplements, just watch your intake of dietary supplements. They're not FDA regulated, so I could produce a bottle of, I could package dirt and sell it at Walmart or Walgreens and tell you that it's whatever I want to tell you, and there's no regulation to stop me from doing that. So the FDA does not have any control over supplements, or that any claims that supplement companies make that they are actually true or verified, because supplements really don't go through any clinical trials unless the company wants to spend the money on doing those clinical trials. And if you look at the back of the label, I think we all know that if we look at the back of the label, that the ingredients are listed in order by weight. So whatever listed first is going to be what's contained the most in that product. So, I have my little Dr. Pepper here, and it said, the first ingredient is carbonated water. So water is going to be the major component in my little Dr. Pepper there. Just some general rules. Product labels cannot state that supplement diagnoses, prevents, treats, or cures any disease. They can only state facts that are supported by evidence. All right, so dietary supplements, we all think that they are very healthy, and some of them are. Some of them are not. I think that we can learn a lot from traditional Chinese medicine, which you see ginseng, ephedra, so ginkgo biloba. A lot of these came from people that worked with roots and plants and herbs and stuff like that, and that they didn't have many thousands of years ago, we didn't have microscopes and technology and clinical trials to go through the process of how do we know or prove or correlate that this drug does treat this condition. Here are just some things that so here's just a list of different supplements and health conditions. So not everything is good. So definitely check with your doctor or nurse practitioner, or PA, or whomever, healthcare provider, before starting a supplement. It says here ginseng has been associated with anxiety and panic attacks. Actually, this one is very weird because you can actually find literature that says ginseng will help with anxiety and panic attacks, and you can find literature that says ginseng will make anxiety and panic attacks worse. But so here you can just read the list. Ginkgo biloba can be associated with intracranial hemorrhages. This sibutramine can be associated with heart attacks. They actually did a study on this, and um, so just like I said, be careful about which people take. St. John's wort is a big one, so just be careful about mood changes if you take that. Echinacea, people take that a lot, so just watch out for GI, gastrointestinal upset. Um, Beta carotene, that's found in carrots. Um, let's see, what's another one? Kava, that seems to be coming back around a lot. Ginseng, also mood changes. Ephedra, that was a big diet pill in like the 80s and 90s. That one's not too much, that's not around too much anymore. Ephedra did a lot of bad things. Echinacea, St. John's wort, ginkgo. All right. So like I said, just be careful about what you are taking in forms of supplements. So as we know, we have to provide enough caloric intake to meet our body's demands, those fatty acids, the amino acids, vitamins, and minerals to maintain and repair our tissues. And those requirements are going to change or be different depending on our age, our sex, our growth rate, level of physical activity, what stress levels we have, any genetic or environmental factors. And we have, the FDA or the RDA that is going to give us our recommended daily allowances. And we have this, the USDA that, we used to have this food pyramid. And now we have this thing called My Plate, which we'll see here in a second, that tells us, what we should eat. For vegetarians, you will need to know this chart. There's a test question on it. But, if you are a vegan, basically, if you're a true vegan, you do not eat any type of animal products or animal foods. If you're an ovo-vegetarian, fruits and eggs are allowed, but you don't eat dairy or meat. If you're a lacto-vegetarian, you can eat dairies and fruits. You don't eat eggs or meat. You have a lacto-ovo-vegetarian, you have a pesco-vegetarian, and a semi-vegetarian. And you can see what is allowed and what is not allowed. So basically, with vegetarians, you can't eat meat. And then there's some degree of what dairy products or fruits and eggs and what eggs and dairy products are allowed. I always make a joke about, I say that I am strictly vegan. Excuse me. I say that I am strictly vegan, but I will allow myself to eat red meat, hamburgers, hot dogs, chicken, fish, eggs, fruits, dairy, which means I'm not vegetarian or vegan at all. All right, so this is My Plate. This is what replaced the food pyramid. So here you can see that fruits should occupy about a third of the left vertical half of the plate, and vegetables take up about 2/3 of the left half. Grains occupy just over half of the right side of the plate. Proteins take up just under half of the right side, and dairy is shown as a circle beside the round plate. It's smaller than the size of that of fruit. So you can see how our plate is supposed to be proportioned. So grains and vegetables are about equal proportions, and proteins and fruits are about equal proportions in what we eat. And then you have a cup of milk. And you can see here what we are supposed to eat in each category. All right. So, nutrition and the athlete. So, we know that athletes typically eat different than non-athletes, and they're going to consume more. They're going to consume more calories, but depending on what sports you're in, you might have an altered protein, carb, fat ratio. So the recommendation is if you are doing frequent strenuous activity, you should be doing about 60% carb, 18% protein, and about 22% fat. And that you should eat most carbs from vegetables and grains. And because you're working out so much, you should eat frequently. You should eat about 5 to 6 times per day as opposed to 2 to 3 times per day. And then athletes should eat about 25% more than sedentary people. Definitely drink a lot of water to counteract whatever you are sweating out. And if you are following a balanced diet, you should not need any vitamins or minerals. Now, creatine supplements. We talked about creatine back in chapter 9, I believe. So it doesn't necessarily improve your athletic performance, but if you're working out a lot, it can help when your natural creatine becomes depleted. All right, so malnutrition. Malnutrition is basically poor nutrition that results from lack of essential nutrients or the inability or failure to use them. So if you have undernutrition, that is going to be a deficiency of those essential nutrients. You don't take them in. You are under eating. Or you are not eating enough to maintain your physical activity. If you are a top performing athlete and you work out 8 hours a day, but you're only eating 1,000 calories, you are still undernourished and you have poor nutrition because you're not bringing in enough calories to support your expenditure. Overnutrition is what most people in the United States suffer from. You have an excess of nutrient intake. And just some causes of malnutrition, lack of available food, poor quality of food, overeating, or taking too much supplements. And it could be just sheer laziness as well. We would rather go to McDonald's. And okay, so let's say that you have a family of, so you're a single mom. And by no means am I knocking a single mom. I think you're going to be the hardest working person out there. But it's easier as if you're a single, I'll just say single parent, but let's say you're a single parent with 3 kids. It's much easier to go through McDonald's drive-through and get everyone a Happy Meal and get yourself a quarter pounder with cheese value meal. And that's going to cost you, let's say a Happy Meal is what now, $4, and a quarter pounder with cheese meal is, we'll say, $6, so 12. So let's say you spend about $20 at McDonald's, and that might be on the underside. So let's just say you spend $20 at McDonald's. It's much easier to do that, and it saves a lot of time by going through the McDonald's drive-through than it is to go to the grocery store and use that $20 to spend it on healthy food. And then it takes time to prep that food and to cook that food and to wash it and to prepare it. And so a lot of times we take that easier way out, and we don't necessarily make those good choices and we provide that malnutrition in order to save time. All right, so we have primary and secondary malnutrition. Primary malnutrition comes from diet alone. Secondary malnutrition, we have an adequate diet, but um, the something in our body promotes that malnutrition. So for example, um, here, the example is a person with a deficiency of bile salts develops a deficiency of fat soluble vitamins. So secondary malnutrition usually results from, it could be like from an underlying disease that compromises growth directly, um, or has a bad effect on appetite or the absorption of nutrients, like a malabsorption infection. Um, a lot of these diseases, I mean, you can see these diseases for like, let's see, cerebral palsy or like Guillain-Barré syndrome. Let's see, asthma could be a secondary malnutrition. Let's see, what else? Chronic liver disease, celiac disease, inflammatory bowel disease, kidney disease. Let's see, hemolytic anemia, tuberculosis. So, all right. Let's continue on. All right, starvation. So we can actually go about 50 to 70 days without food. The body will begin to digest itself. It will, you'll see low blood pressure, slowing of the pulse, chills, dry skin, hair loss, poor immunity. I mean, at this point, the body has like a pecking order of what it will do to protect itself. Obviously, the body needs the heart and the brain to live, and anything else is secondary. So the body doesn't really need the big toe to survive. The body doesn't really need the muscles to survive. The skeletal muscles, the body really doesn't need the legs to survive or the arms in order to survive. So you're going to see a lot of your peripheral, your legs and your arms to deteriorate. All right. So some of your common nutritional or starvational disorders, two of the big ones are marasmus and kwashiorkor. Marasmus is basically a lack of calories and protein, whereas kwashiorkor is a protein starvation, or a dietary deficiency of protein. And you can see the kwashiorkor, or on the marasmus side, you have lack of calories and protein. So you pretty much you'd be skin and bones. Whereas kwashiorkor, you have enough calories, but you are protein deficient. And if you go back to that graph, the arterioles and the venules and the 17 or the 20 liters and the 17 liters, you're going to be developing edema because of that, because you have that dietary deficiency of proteins, and your colloid osmotic pressure is going to be decreased because you don't have those plasma proteins. Anorexia nervosa is an eating disorder, mostly definitely a psychological component to it. And it's where you starve yourself, and adolescents are at higher risk, or highest risk, especially nowadays with social media. And, people look at social media and they see, oh my gosh, I have to be this, size 2, or else I don't look pretty. And with social media, we have a lot of body shaming. Oh, you're fat. Oh, you're ugly. And it just uh, kind of stirs the pot for development of psychological disorders. And social media is very unregulated. So, and really, parents have no idea what's going on in social media. So, teens do develop. Eating disorders. So anorexia is one where basically you're starving yourself. And in the worst forms, you are. I told you about one of my family members that kind of measured everything in and out. In worst cases, in the worst extreme cases, you measure your food and down to the calorie what comes in. You know how many milliliters of pee you urinated. You know how many ounces of poop you pooped out. And you know exactly what your protein or what your caloric balance is in versus out. Bulimia is another eating disorder where you eat the food, but then you go throw it up right away. Um, so not only do you have the psychological component and you have the starvation, but you now are you're introducing the stomach acid into your esophagus, mouth, and your teeth. And so now you could have problems with your teeth. All right. Lifespan changes. Dietary requirements remain kind of pretty much the same throughout your life, with the exception, once you hit puberty after that. Your BMR obviously is going to rise in your early childhood because you're going through growth spurts. It's going to peak in your adolescence because of your growth spurts and puberty. And then it's going to decline in adulthood. And your ability to obtain adequate nutrition often reflects the medical conditions as well as socioeconomic conditions and circumstances. And I don't think we need to spend any time on that because we know that. And it's going to be confounded by depression, tooth decay, periodontal disease, diabetes, and then, deficiency of vitamin A. We said that it's stored in the liver. It can take up to 2 years to show signs and symptoms. Calcium deficiency may not show signs as bones lose mineral content. Vitamin D deficiency may develop in the absence of sun exposure. And then here, I just wanted to show you how many calories per day the average females and males need to eat based on your age. And again, this will change depending on your activity level, but and you don't need to know these numbers. So, all right, so that is it for this chapter. If you need anything, please let me know. All right, take care.